watched a James Lindsay 20-minute cut yesterday talking about mysticism. And he says one of the things about a magic trick, mysticism is the same as a magic trick. They know something that you don't, and that gives them the authority to do this thing that you don't like. And that's wrapped in mysticism. And like a magic trick, mysticism loses its power if you know how it's done. So if you have somebody who's going around saying, hey, this is a crappy magic trick, and see how it's done, see what they're doing, do you see the language they're using, do you see how they're putting this into a context to make you think this? That's what I do. I dispel the mysticism that they're trying to create to manufacture consent to do the things, the terrible things that they're doing on our behalf. And the reason that they had to get rid of me, the reason that they had to censor me, I think, is because I demystified the magic trick. I pointed out the magic trick because I wasn't falling for it. I was saying, hold on a second, this seems like the same trick we fell for in Iraq. This seems like exactly the same, even pressure points. The babies, what about the babies? Right. So it's very, very interesting. If you want to understand the mysticism and understand, but that's basically what it boils down to, understand that they're trying to manufacture consent through you being confused and not confident in your position. Basically, Lindsay says, if you start feeling mysticized, like you're not 100% sure why this is the wrong argument, but you know it's the wrong argument, don't commit to anything. Back up and think about it, because you're probably right. So it's very interesting. But yeah, the whole idea of the magic trick losing its power is similar to their magic trick losing its power if you have somebody like me pointing it out. So it's very interesting. It gave insight into possibly why I was canceled. So anyway, there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, we're going to start with Bill C-69, because it's very, very interesting that the Supreme Court of Canada came down against the federal government. I mean, they've been stacking that court for years and years and years. And I did not expect them to. They were okay with the carbon tax, but this is a bridge too far. Color me shocked. Okay, here we go. Sharon Stubbs, and she's an MP. She's the CPC MP for Lakeland, Shadow Minister for Natural Resources. So she's weighing in on this decision. Breaking overall, the Supreme Court of Canada's decision is devastating for the Trudeau Liberals. It ruled that Bill C-69 is largely unconstitutional and highlights all the concerns about overreach, jurisdictional clarity, the project list, and a negative impact on many Indigenous communities. The Conservatives pointed out repeatedly during debates on Bill C-69 and many times since, more to come. Right, so there's a problem here. The problem has been very clear. We've talked about it in the House of Commons. You ignored us to get to a point where the bill was passed, it became law, the law is illegal, and now we have to deal with that. So great. Good work, Liberals. You've wasted everyone's time and negatively impacted a whole bunch of energy projects that could be enriching Canada, but instead they're not, because of this illegal thing that the government passed because they ignored people who had concerns about it. Here's CPAC, and this is Galbo, and he's reporting, he's saying this. It's a minute and 44 seconds. Oh my gosh, it seems so much longer. I'll play the first minute. I'll just play a little bit of it because Galbo's voice grates on me almost as much as Trudeau's. Okay, here we go.
Today, we accept the court's opinion. It provides new guidance on the Impact Assessment Act, while explicitly affirming the right of the Government of Canada to put in place impact assessment legislation and collaborate with provinces on environmental protection. We developed the Impact Assessment Act to create a better set of rules that respect the environment, Indigenous rights, and ensure projects get a
blah, 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 blah. Here's a quote. We will follow the guidance of the court and collaborate with provinces and Indigenous groups to ensure an impact assessment process that works for all Canadians, says Minister Guilbeault after Supreme Court found Impact Assessment Act to be largely unconstitutional. At the end of this, he attacks Pierre Poilievre for not having a plan. Well, at least he's not passing illegal, who knows? At least he's not passing illegal laws in the last 8 years. How's that? Is that true? Well, he agreed with all of the lockdown stuff, right? So there are caveats there. Here's Danielle Smith. She's talking about Bill C-69. We are very pleased with the Supreme Court's decision confirming the unconstitutionality of the federal government's destructive Bill C-69 legislation. This legislation is already responsible for the loss of tens of billions in investments, as well as thousands of jobs across many provinces and economic sectors. The ruling today represents an opportunity for all provinces to stop that bleeding and begin the process of reattracting those investments and jobs to our economies. Could you trust Canada after you spent a lot of money to set up, an oil thing, exploration, jump through hoops? were stalled for years by the government, and then, a new government comes in, the Harper government, things seem okay, and then the Liberal government comes in, Trudeau government, and things are stalled again for years. Would you build a business here? It makes Canada look bad the more inconsistent we are with stuff like this. So it's good that the Supreme Court's saying this, but there's an appeal. I'll get to the appeal in a minute. Back to Danielle Smith. The decision is also a massive win for the protection of sovereign provincial rights under the Constitution. The federal government, through passage of Bill C-69 and continuing now with their proposed electricity regulations and oil and gas emissions cap, is blatantly attempting to erode and emasculate the rights and authorities of provinces as an equal order of government under the Canadian Constitution. Today's court decision significantly strengthens our province's legal position as we work to protect Albertans from federal intrusion into various areas of sovereign provincial jurisdiction. Albertans will continue to partner with other willing provinces and interveners in pushing back against these unconstitutional federal efforts using all legal means available to us. Finally, we will call on the federal government to learn the lessons from this decision and abandon their ongoing unconstitutional efforts to seize regulatory control over the electricity and natural resources sector of the provinces. Instead, we invite them once more to come to the table in good faith and work with Alberta to align our mutual efforts on emission reduction and development of our electricity grid and world-class energy sector. In this regard, we hope today's decision provides an opportunity for a reset in the ongoing provincial-federal discussion on these issues. It won't. Sorry, Danielle Smith. What's going to happen is they're going to take this back. They're going to pass amendments. The amendments won't address anything meaningful, and you'll have to take them back to court again for the amendments. The court will rule in your favor again, and then the government will go back and pass more amendments. Rinse and repeat, right? And the idea is to stall until everybody just gives up or you age out of office and they get somebody who's amenable to these things. Like Nenshi or something to that effect, right? Here's BNN Bloomberg. They're reporting the same thing. Supreme Court majority rules against federal impact assessment laws, Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law. Andrew Scheer says Bill C-69 cost our economy billions, hurt energy sector workers, and has a negative impact on Indigenous communities. It turns out it's also unconstitutional. After 8 years of failure, it's clear Trudeau is not worth the cost. That's another branding bit. Okay, so Trudeau is not worth the cost is another thing that the Conservatives are using for branding. All of this branding is going to come into play during the next federal election. It's a good, they understand Trump uses branding masterfully and uses the media, uses the branding to manipulate the media. In this case, the branding is just used for communicating in politics, but at least they're doing it. So at least somebody's on the board with some kind of stuff like this. Like in Canada, you don't usually see that. And if you do, it's ham-fisted, clumsy, and it doesn't take. So this is actually something that might take. National Post is reporting Liberals to keep No More Pipelines Act with amendments after Supreme Court rules it's unconstitutional. Chief Justice Wagner writes in the majority opinion that while the government has a role to play in protecting the environment, it also has to respect the bounds of the Constitution. We're not bound by... See, I think that the Canadian Constitution is paused or not in play according to the government because we're moving on the way to a UN post-national state. And our laws haven't caught up with that yet. And so stuff like this is going to be stalled because they want it to be a central governed, centrally planned thing. The provinces shouldn't have autonomy to create their own environmental stuff. The environmental stuff has to align with the United Nations and so on and so forth. They're trying to bring that in, and they can't. They'll show us their hand if they make that argument in court, right? So they're going to shadow box a little bit until they can wear people out, I guess, right? And just implement it anyway, because you can't easily change the laws of the land, but you can stack the courts, have the courts ignore certain things, and then start living in a certain way and say, well, the laws of the land don't really reflect the way we're living, actually. We've got to let all these dangerous people out, and we've got to put all these speech violators into the prisons, right? It's very interesting what's going on, but it's very slow to manipulate people into giving away their freedoms. Back to this. The Alberta government has challenged the law, arguing that the law interferes in areas outlined as provincial jurisdiction in the Constitution. The Alberta Court of Appeal found in 2022 that the act was beyond the federal government's powers, leading to Friday's Supreme Court decision. In a 5-2 decision, the Supreme Court found that the law could apply to projects on federal lands or those receiving federal financing, but said the federal government was acting outside of its jurisdiction if it used the law more broadly. Chief Justice Richard Wagner wrote the majority decision and said the government has a role to play in protecting the environment, but it also has to respect the bounds of the Constitution. Ooh, they don't like that. They're not going to want that. Here is Viva Fry, and this is just highlights from Bill C-69, and he's asking, Gelbo, what does gender have to do with this? What does gender have to do with the environmental impact, eh? I'm open-minded. Please explain. So Bill, 6 key points of Bill C-69. One of them is the agency with the new authority will be responsible for environmental, social, health, gender, and economic impact assessments, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. And number 4, mandatory factors include concerns, interests, and rights of Indigenous people, climate obligations, and effects on gender, sex, and identity issues. I thought it was going to say identifiability issues. Identity issues. So what does that have to do with anything? Gelbo's not going to answer, because all it's built to do is hamstring the industry and to tie it up in all sorts of legal mumbo jumbo, so it doesn't actually produce anything valuable. Here is an exchange between Danielle Smith talking about how damaging Mr. Gelbo's policies are for Alberta and for Canada. This is accurate. I think that she's telling the truth. Here we go.
Oh boy, they just don't stop, do they? That's a joke. Minister Guilbeault has done more damage to our investment climate in this province than probably any single federal minister I've ever seen.
I like that she had to couch that with, that's a joke. They don't ever stop. I'm joking. Next. Another reporter asks, why do you keep calling it the No More Pipelines Act? Here we go.
But why do you call it the No More Pipelines Act? This ruling, and what you were talking about, was things that are exclusively on provincial jurisdiction. Pipelines, generally speaking, are not. I mean, there are some, surely, but why do you use that term, No More Pipelines Act?
As you saw, I said that it has been called the No More Pipelines Act. That's how the former premier used to refer to it. I called it the Don't Build Anything Anywhere Anytime Act because I was very concerned about the ways in which they were interfering in provincial jurisdiction. The boundary projects, they never had any constitutional authority over, and that includes transmission lines and pipelines that are solely within the boundaries of Alberta, and we do a lot of pipeline construction, but it was the major projects that I was most concerned. They wanted to interfere in SAGD, they wanted to prevent us from building highways, they wanted to prevent us from building power generation plants that were larger than 200 megawatts, and those are the sections that have now been rendered unconstitutional. So I'm glad to see that they found the right balance. They recognize that we have 2 orders of government with sovereign powers and exclusive jurisdiction, and acknowledge that exclusive jurisdiction on resource development and on electricity belongs to us.
So wait for the appeal, because there's going to be an appeal. The Supreme Court of Canada says the court is allowed in the appeal in part in reference regarding the Impact Assessment Act. It ruled that the federal impact assessment scheme is largely unconstitutional. Read the plain language summary here. So there you go. And I'm not going to read through the summary, but I think that it's interesting how much everybody is celebrating this. It seems like a win. I hope that it's a win. I hope that the final hurdle, I hope that the federal government doesn't pull out a win on appeal. They won in Alberta, they won the Supreme Court, and then on appeal, oh yeah, you know what, you're totally right. You can totally do that. I hope not, but I've been disappointed before. Maxime Bernier, let's talk about Israel. And Maxime Bernier has a great point. It's a little bit of a long point, but it's a great point. Here we go. Many people are misunderstanding my position on the conflict in Israel and are reading into my statements all sorts of positions I did not express. I decided several years ago I would stop commenting with thoughts and prayers or denunciations every time something horrible happened in another country that became newsworthy in Canada. It had become a silly race to see which politician was the fastest to express platitudes, with media talking heads dissecting the meaning and strength of every word. Since then, I've consistently only commented on foreign conflicts or terrorist attacks as it directly concerns Canada, which is in line with my Canada First policy. The first time this attracted attention was when the press ganged up on me in 2020 because I made no statement following the shooting at mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, which Trudeau exploited for weeks to call everybody racist, Islamophobe, and white supremacist. I obviously abhor all forms of violence against innocent civilians everywhere, but as I noted earlier this week, there are atrocities committed almost every day somewhere in the world, and no one in Canada comments on them or is pressuring me to show empathy and take sides in a foreign conflict, even though there are surely some Canadians who have connections with all these events. I don't see any reason to change this rule now. My main concern is to keep Canada out of this conflict in the Middle East and not help make things worse as we're doing in Ukraine. I don't want to be sucked into the debate about who is good, bad, really, really bad, why, and which actions by foreign actors is morally justified or not, when there's absolutely nothing I or even Canada can do about it. I want to focus on Canadian issues on which I can have an influence. For example, I've commented on the fact that thanks to mass immigration with no value test and no demand that immigrants integrate into our society, that there are people who live in Canada who want to bring their tribal hatred here and want to get us involved. That's a comment on a Canadian problem, not on a foreign conflict. If you don't like that stance, support one of the other parties. You have a lot of choice. They are once again all saying the same thing as they do regarding Ukraine. Great point. I am trying to give you color on what's going on in Israel because it's newsworthy, because everybody and his dog is talking about it, even though we have issues in Canada, and even though Canadians, through tax dollars and funding and foreign funding, are funding both sides of this. To be honest, I don't know how much we're sending to Israel. I think that we are. Stephen Harper was a staunch Israeli supporter. Trudeau is an Israeli supporter. Mr. Polyev is an Israeli supporter. I think that we are. I just don't have a number for you. And I know that we are funding Hamas, as Justin Trudeau announced it, and we talked about it yesterday. So I'm trying to give you as much color as it applies to Canada, this conflict, how we're involved, the history, although that's verboten. If you tell people the history of this, to bring into question the validity of Israel's statement of this was unprovoked, that's verboten. You're not allowed to do that. You can't point out that there is history here. There is history here. And I mean, is Canada going to help decide this 1,000-year-old war? No. We should stay out of it. We should keep our noses clean and keep to ourselves. We should stop inserting ourselves in this, but we keep doing it. And so I have to keep talking about it because we keep doing it. And as embarrassing and terrible as it is, unfortunately, our leaders represent us until we remove those leaders to replace them with leaders who better represent us, because these people, I think, represent us terribly. Here is Justin Trudeau, and he says, I spoke with Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, today. I condemned Hamas's attack against Israel, discussed the importance of protecting Palestinian and Israeli civilians, and stressed the need to ensure humanitarian access to Palestinian civilians. This is not going to happen. Nobody believes that there are Palestinian civilians. Okay? Here is Netanyahu. This is a reminder from yesterday. This is a reminder from yesterday that Netanyahu said nobody should talk to Palestine. Nobody should talk to Hamas. They should be unfriended from the entire international community. But first, I want to show you what I was talking about. Here is the Israeli Israeli president saying that there are no innocent civilians in Palestine. It does not happen. That doesn't exist. Period. There's no civilians at all in Palestine. So Henry says, Israel's president is denying the concept of innocent civilians on the brink of a major military offensive, a very bad sign. This is from October 13th, which is yesterday at 8:43 a.m. In comments Friday, Israel's President Isaac Herzog said Palestinians in Gaza were collectively responsible for the attack. Quote, it's not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware or not being involved. It's absolutely not true. He said they could have risen up. They could have fought against the evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat in 2006. Okay, here's an Israeli Defense Minister, Yoval Gallant. Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. So he's speaking here. I'll read. He's not speaking English. He's speaking Israeli. He says, we will eliminate everything, Israel. Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. If it doesn't take one day, it will take a week. It will take weeks or even months. We will reach all places. There is no way that our brothers, our children, our parents will be killed. And we won't react because we are a state. So we understand that Hamas wanted to change the situation. It will change back 180 degrees. And they will regret this moment. They will regret it. So there are no innocents. There are no innocents whatsoever. Here's one more. This is Sky News, and the news broadcaster tries to push the Israeli guy about innocence in Palestine, and he says no.
And what about those Palestinians in hospital who are on life support and babies and incubators whose life support and incubator will have to be turned off because the Israelis have cut the power to Gaza.
Are you seriously keep on asking me about Palestinian civilians? What's wrong with you? Have you not seen what happened? We're fighting Nazis. We don't target them. Now, the world can come and bring them anything they want. If you want to bring them electricity, I'm not going to feed electricity or water to my enemies. If anyone else wants, that's fine. We're not responsible for them.
This is the point.
But you
this
keep
is the
on.
point.
I want to tell you. No, listen. You listen to me right now. I've heard you enough.
No, I understand. We're trying to have a conversation here. Listen, this is my program. This is my show. And I am asking the questions. You're raising your voice, and I've asked you, and we've already stopped, please, and let me finish. We've already distinguished between Hamas.
I want to tell you, shame on you.
You're trying to speak over me.
We are not. Shame on you.
It's nothing about shame. We're trying to have a conversation about a very serious situation here, and you are refusing to address it.
So, refresher: if Palestinians kill Israeli babies, bad. If Israel cuts off electricity, forcing babies in incubators in hospitals to die, good, because there's no innocence in Palestine. We're all understanding what the positions are now. Okay, that's where we're at. All right, it's intolerable for our enemies to kill babies. They may come and kill your babies, but if we cut off, we're not supplying power to our enemies for them to keep their hospitals and things like that on, even though previously that's exactly what we did. So it's interesting to me. So there are no innocents in Palestine. They were all in on it. They could have risen up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Justin Trudeau says, I spoke with the president of the Palestinian Authority, and we're going to try and protect Palestinian civilians. Is there a situation where you would go in there? Justin Trudeau tells you, you've got to go in there and protect Palestinian civilians into the Gaza Strip there. You have fun. We've sent $10 million. So go. Are you going in there? Here is Netanyahu from yesterday talking about how you are supposed to unfriend Palestine and Hamas.
And Hamas should be treated exactly the way ISIS was treated. They should be spit out from the community of nations. No leader should meet them. No country should harbor them. And those that do should be sanctioned. Tony, my friend.
So it's interesting because right after that, Trudeau says, yeah, I'm going to send a message to the leader of the Palestinian Authority. How close would the leader of the Palestinian Authority be to the leadership of the country that is Hamas? Right? Here is Wall Street Silver. He says the USS Gerald Ford has arrived in the Mediterranean to support Israel, measuring more than 1,100 feet long, 255 feet wide, and 250 feet high. The $18 billion vessel is the largest warship ever built. The Palestinians are armed to the teeth, so we need a warship, right? An American warship, no less. And it's an aircraft carrier, right? So it's a huge ship, and I heard they're sending more. Here's me, and it says, your great-grandfathers were tricked into World War I with false stories of German atrocities committed on neutral Belgian civilians, including babies. Your grandfathers fell for the Gulf of Tonkin. Your parents fell for babies in incubators in Iraq. I showed you that video. And will we be the generation that breaks the curse? Will we say no further? I don't think so. It seems like we're all on board for this. Here's Mel Jolie, and she says, I don't know who this is. She says, I'm with somebody. Eli Cohen, and he's the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Israel, and she's there to discuss the impacts of Hamas's terrorist attack, one of the most deadly the country has ever seen. I reiterated our support, Canada's support for Israel's right to self-defense, while ensuring Palestinian civilians are protected with access to humanitarian aid in Gaza. Palestinian civilians don't exist according to the Israeli government. So weird. Right? From Netanyahu to they should be unstated to the generals on the ground acting out the invasion, the ground force aspect of this war. They're saying there are no innocent people here. There are no innocents. So what are we funding exactly? precisely? Who's it going to? Canada Proud says Mel Joly is definitely taking after Justin Trudeau after leaving Canadians stranded in Israel by keeping the embassy closed for Thanksgiving weekend, then lying about it, then claiming she was too busy. Melanie Joly travels to Israel to take selfies. You know what this is reminiscent of? Benghazi. Benghazi was under attack. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama hung out for the weekend. They partied. They probably ordered some hot dogs and pizza or something like that. And then they claimed that it was over anger over a video depicting the Prophet Muhammad, et cetera, but it was a very different situation. Hillary Clinton was brought in to testify because she was, I think she was Secretary of State, or there was a reason that she should have been involved in the response. Nothing happened. People died. And like, it was a big deal. And they just tried to kind of gloss over it. Like, we didn't do anything wrong. We did exactly everything we were supposed to do. And you people are crazy that like, this is a problem. And it happened so long ago. Why are we even talking about this? Right? At this point, what does it matter anyway, I think is the quote, but it's not. I'm misquoting it, but that was the sentiment. So it reminds me a lot of Benghazi. That's interesting. Here's Keith, and he says, a recap of events sticking only to the facts so far. Now, all of the facts around Israel and Palestine and Hamas attack, all of that stuff. And is Hamas interchangeable with Palestine? If you're talking about the leadership of Palestine, the government of Palestine, Hamas could be interchangeable with that. If you're talking about the Palestinian people, like the 2 million people who live there, I think Hamas and Palestinian people, those are different people, right? The leadership is not the population. The leadership is a group of people who are making decisions, and the population is a group of people who may or may not be represented by the leadership. Are you represented by the Canadian leadership? I would say that we're not well anyway. And so, you know, if you talk about Canadian leadership, are you talking about the Canadian people? If you talk about the Palestinian leadership, are you talking about the Palestinian people? Keeping in mind that the Palestinian people have not been able to have an election since they elected Hamas in 2006. So that's a while ago. So, right? Can you imagine if Trudeau was still in charge in 20 years, right? Like 18 years, whatever it is, right? Like, holy smoke, or 10 more years? It'd be wild. Anyway, so the facts can be contested. And even if they are factual, people will tear you down because you say somebody is a Palestinian and not a terrorist Hamas member, right? So they'll tear down your point because you say they're one thing and not another. Take it with a grain of salt. Okay, here's facts that people will try and tear down. And I think that they go through how these facts could be torn down too, but still, we're going to go through it. A recap of events sticking only to the facts so far. For 17 years, the people of Gaza have lived under an illegal blockade. Half of the population are children, which I pointed out yesterday. Over 90% of the drinking water is contaminated. Over half the population are unemployed. Over half the population are considered refugees. Most are descendants of refugees who fled during the Nakba, Israel's ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Now, we haven't gotten into any of that because, I mean, it's wrought with all sorts of ways that I could get it wrong, and I am not a scholar with regards to this region, etc. I just wanted to give you kind of a charge about what happened. This is a part of it, but it's more down the rabbit hole than this podcast is prepared to go today. It's a little beyond the scope because you don't need it to understand the rest. Back to this. Over the course of years, Israel has refused offers of a truce in exchange for lifting the blockade, which is an illegal form of collective punishment under international law. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister of the UK, said the blockade had turned Gaza into a prison camp. I just want to pause here as well. And I said, during this whole thing, people have said the Palestinians have refused to claim statehood or to create a state despite Israel giving them an opportunity to do that, or the international community giving them an opportunity to do that. And my question was always, what were the circumstances surrounding creation of the state? Is creation of the state keeping this border in place? Is the creation of the state continuing the practice of preventing movement, free movement? Is the creation of the state subject to the whims of Israel or the United Nations or a group of people in the United Nations? Were they saying, no, we won't make a state? Or were they saying, no, we won't make a state under these circumstances because it's tyrannical, right? And like, I honestly don't know the answer to that, but it seems like that is what's been happening. You can make a state, but you have to abide by these rules, right? And if you're acting as a terrorist state, then that's one thing. But if you're not, then that's another. And how do we balance that, right? It seems like we're not doing a good job of that. Okay. Back to this. Number 3, last week, the people of Gaza broke out of the world's largest concentration camp and launched an attack on Israel. Again, I am not convinced that that's what happened. We don't have any kind of postmortem on this attack. We don't know who planned it. We're being told that all Palestinians are responsible for this because they could have risen up against their government, who were openly planning this. Like, how did this go down? Why are they all responsible? And if some people from Palestine who were Hamas planned an attack, how did they broach the Israeli, the best, most well-defended border in the world with hand gliders, et cetera, and tractors and things like that? Why was there no response? There's so many questions that just taking this as a this is what happened. The people of the terrorists, Hamas, planned an attack, executed the attack, and that's exactly what happened, right? They broke out of this concentration camp and they attacked Israel and went back to their concentration camp with prisoners. And they thought, this is going to do it. This is going to make the international community give us freedom and respect. Yeah, definitely. Really? Like, do you think that that's true? I can't get there. But maybe it's just cultural. Maybe it's culturally different. I didn't grow up there, so my thinking is not in that direction. Maybe. I don't know. But I really honestly don't know. But it doesn't sound like that's what happened. It sounds like maybe somebody hired some mercenaries. Maybe somebody paid some people to launch this attack from Gaza. Maybe some people paid people in Gaza to launch this attack. Maybe some people paid other people to look the other way as the attack broached the borders and created the havoc needed to justify this military action that we're going through now. I have questions, right? And I'm not prepared to just take, well, those people who were subjugated by these people figured out how to launch a massive attack, and all 2 million of them were in on it. I can't get there. I can't get there. Number 4, there's still no evidence of the claim of 40 beheaded babies. In fact, I've seen that all the evidence that they've tried to pass off has been AI generated images. So that's interesting. The mass rave slaughter or the attack, I've seen the mass rave slaughter is in question now too. I don't know about that. Or the attack aiming to target civilians. The original source for the 40 beheaded babies claim was a radical settler who advanced genocide of Palestinians. We have been given an alleged picture of a charred remains of a baby by the Israeli government. We do not know how or where this baby died. Stories of atrocities were reported uncritically by mainstream media across the West. I haven't heard that the rave story was actually debunked. I heard that some of the parts of the rave story were debunked, like the girl who had the broken legs in the back of the truck was actually not dead, but she was in a hospital in Israel. So I don't know what's true, and I mean, how could you discern it, right, at this point in time? Because everything seems to be purposely very, very muddy and unclear. And it seems like they want it that way, so people are arguing over the details, right? The babies are real, the babies are not. And all of a sudden, an atrocity is justified, right? Or an atrocity's happened, and people aren't really sure about what to say about it, right? It's wild. So back to this. Israel's defense minister said that they were fighting human animals and cut off all water, electricity, fuel, and food into Gaza. As far as I can tell, that's true. At the same time, Netanyahu told Israeli people to prepare for a long war, meaning Israel intends to starve Gaza citizens, civilian population, of essential supplies for a long time. Collective punishment is a war crime. 6, Norman Finkelstein, the world's foremost expert on the Israel-Palestine conflict, said he believes the denial of food and water to Gaza and the promise of a long war constitutes the beginning of a genocide against the people of Gaza. Is that really the beginning? I think that we're past the beginning at this point in time. And not to say, I'm the judge, jury, and executioner of genocides. But if you look at the definition of genocide and start looking at what is happening with regards to that region, then an argument could be made, a much better argument than the argument that Canada is committing an ongoing genocide. And yet Canada agreed that there was an ongoing genocide. And then nothing was done. So even if you do get the international community to agree that Israel is committing genocide against Gaza and the Palestinians, then so what? Like, are you going to go to war to stop it? And if you go to war to stop it, what's the end goal? Are you going to cut out a piece of land in Israel to give to the Palestinians, or the West Bank? Are you going to give that to the Palestinians? Are you going to meaningfully change what's happening? Or are you just going to put it back to what it was last week? because that doesn't seem like a good idea either, right? Funding and all, right? It seems like a bad idea. I was talking to a friend of mine and I said, is there a possibility that you could lose a war? Could you just lose a war and say, we've looked at this and Israel really won this one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to stop funding this ongoing humanitarian disaster. And we're going to take everybody out of there and we're going to rehome you here. Where? Ooh, good question. Great, wonderful question. But the amount of money that's been spent to not make any meaningful progress could be put into making meaningful progress somewhere. And again, I think the core of this, the foundation of this, is being able to promise that your children can grow up and have opportunities. You don't get to grow up rich. You don't get to grow up where there's never any problems. You don't get to grow up in a situation where there's never anybody sad or anything like that. You don't get that. You shouldn't have the world handed to you on a silver platter. I mean, some people are lucky and they do, and they get that. But fundamentally, the opportunity to make something of yourself by producing something that other people find valuable, whether that's work or something that people buy directly from you, and being able to grow your own family, giving people an opportunity to see their grandkids grow up. I don't know that there's a better promise, right? And so if you can do that, maybe you solve that problem. Maybe you get to the point where it's not so raw anymore. Maybe you get to the point where it's like we had a disagreement and shit got bad, but we found a way out of it. You know what I mean? And I don't know where I don't know what the solution is. I don't, but it seems like what we're doing is not the solution. What we're doing is contributing to the problem. So we should do something different. Number 7, an elected member of the Israeli ruling party called for a second Nakaba. I'm getting that wrong. On Palestinians. I think that's going on right now. Another member of the Israeli Knesset said there are no, I think that's the ruling, that's like the House of Commons, the House of Lords, but I could be wrong. Said there are no innocents in Gaza, advocating flattening it. The Israeli president said tonight that there is no innocent civilians in Gaza. It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. So, I mean, welcome to the world, kids. Sorry, you're Palestinian. Right? That's not so good. 8, Israel killed hundreds of civilians in a terror bombing campaign and dropped outlawed white phosphorus on the densely populated Gaza Strip. Medics in Gaza say ambulances and health facilities have been targeted by IDF missiles. I've heard of health facilities being given a shorter time to evacuate and then they move on them earlier, but that could just be internet chatter. I'm not sure. Number 9, after 6 days of bombardment, over 300,000 people have been left homeless, 1,500 Palestinians dead. As of the last reports, about 600 have been children. 10, last night, Israel gave over 1 million people a day's notice to evacuate half of Gaza, intending to flatten the area in a ground invasion. There is credible video evidence that Israel did not respect its commitment to avoid bombing the main roads used for evacuation and bombed a truck carrying dozens of civilians. Tonight, 11, Israel announced it would cut off the internet from Gaza, meaning that the horrors it is about to enact on the population will be hidden from the world. These are facts. If you state them, you will be accused of defending terrorism or being anti-Semitic, but they are facts. When talk of collective punishment, ethnic cleansing, and outright genocide are being normalized among supposedly respected voices, we should be very skeptical of narratives being presented to us by the same people. Yeah, I'm very skeptical of what's going on because things are very concerning. Here's Pierre Poilievre being asked, will you continue funding Palestine and Hamas? And he says,
on Tuesday, the government of Canada announced it will be continuing with millions of dollars of funds and aid, claiming they will ensure none of that will go to aiding Hamas. If your party is to form government, will you commit to ending funds to the Hamas-linked UNRWA organization?
We will end all foreign aid to terrorists, dictators, and wasteful multinational bureaucracies. One of my first actions as Prime Minister will be to carry out a full review of every dollar we send out of this country to make sure that we stop giving money to terrorists, dictators, and useless Marxist international bureaucracies. That will be at the top of my foreign policy list. We're going to bring our money home to Canada and take care of our people in this country.
So that's one of the strongest answers I've seen from Poilievre, honestly. And I mean, there are a lot of people who are going to really like that. So it's a good answer. It's a solid position, and good for him for articulating it. I mean, it's hard to criticize that. T says, these guys are talking about the UK and getting involved in this Israeli conflict. Layla says the UK must take a leading role in trying to find lasting peace. The people of Israel and Palestine have a right to live free from fear. Read my thoughts below. And T says if we do get involved, we will be blamed for any atrocities that subsequently occur in the region. We will also be increasing our chances of being targeted by Islamic terrorists in Britain. We are still being blamed today for our involvement in others' affairs hundreds of years ago. Yeah, not to mention the Iraq War. York University faces calls to decertify student union over statement of solidarity with Palestinians. So this whole thing's blowing up. There's more than meets the eye here as well. But York University issued a statement to Global News that the school unequivocally condemns the inflammatory statement shared by 3 student unions. Freedom of expression has limits and comes with responsibilities. It must never reach into promoting or justifying violence against unarmed civilians, the statement read. To suggest otherwise is abhorrent and does not reflect the views of York University nor the perspective of many thousands of York University students. So, and as I've said before, celebrating the death of civilians, the people who committed those atrocities and crimes should absolutely be brought to justice. But collectively punishing an entire country for the act of some terrorists, that's bad. That's very bad. Back to this. York University says it calls on the executives of York Federation Students, York University Graduate Students Association, and the Glendon College Student Union to immediately clarify that they firmly reject any acts of violence or discrimination against Jewish students or other members of the community. Despite the university issuing a response to the student union letter, the House Father calls on the university officials to go further. I think they should decertify the Students Association, House Father said. I think York University should make sure that at the very least that all the people who were involved in producing that statement no longer represent students. House Father argued York University carries the responsibility of creating a safe space for Jews, Jewish, and pro-Israeli students on campus. So there you go. You have to do this because we want you to. Carl says, remember when a Muslim refugee in France went into a park and literally started stabbing babies with a knife? Weird how that just dissipated, isn't it? It's super weird. Super crazy, right? And they use children being attacked to tug on your heartstrings. Every report had estimates of children. 600 children killed in Palestine, 1,500 Palestinians killed. The number of Jewish people that I heard were killed, Israelis killed during the terrorist attack was 1,000. So it is eye for an eye, or how about if you commit a terrorist attack, we will flatten your country. Eye for an eye. Pretty wild stuff. Jihad was called for Friday, and yesterday I showed a video of New York with a person doing donuts, and apparently that was a Puerto Rican flag, not a Palestinian flag. So apologies about getting it wrong. There was a community note yesterday afternoon, and I thought, oh man, I got to talk about that. So apologies about that. I do get things wrong sometimes, but it seems the entire internet got that one wrong. But we were seeing all sorts of people in solidarity with Palestine across the world. So it's interesting to note. Ezra Levent is talking about that. He says, he's responding to the Globe and Mail. The Globe and Mail says, hate incidents across Canada prompt schools, places of worship to tighten security. And Ezra says, it's odd that the tweet doesn't mention who is hating who is committing crimes against who needs protection from who. I mean, the threat could be anyone, maybe even truckers. Then again, they never use the word terrorist either, so it's to be expected. Very interesting stuff. CTV News is reporting Canadian safety ministers issued a statement about potential unrest amid Hamas-Israel war. Click on the image below to read more. Hamas-Israel war. Palestinian-Israeli war? Hamas-Israeli war? The whole idea of people being afraid was the point of calling for the day of action. The point was for you to be afraid. Nothing else. Not actually for something terrifying to happen to you. Just that you know that there's that potential and you should be afraid. And the media buying into this is keying into that you should be afraid idea. And that's scary, right? It's scary. Everybody, the Toronto police, I reported on it yesterday, Toronto police, Montreal police, a whole bunch of different places. Schools were sending out communications. Waterloo Regional District School Board sent out a communication saying we're changing our policies for the day to make sure people are safe, so on and so forth. That's fear driving behavior. And is it legitimate fear? I don't know. Do you think it is? I, on one side, want to err on the side of safety to keep people safe. But on the other side, you have to live your life free of fear, because if you let fear arrest your ability to live a life free, then you are creating your own prison because of what might happen. You can't live like that. You know what I mean? You can't. Ryan Garrettson, let's talk about the ArriveCAN scam. Ryan says, ArriveCAN now has 715,000 4.5-star reviews, which is more than Disney Plus, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Apple TV reviews combined. An app that is optional in Canada. In Canada, we have 40 million people, right? Like, and Apple Plus and Apple TV and Prime Video and Netflix, Disney Plus, these things serve populations all across North America, all across the world. How has ArriveCAN got 715,000 4.5-star reviews? That's crazy, and paid for by us. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful